Hi, everybody. I'm going to be starting in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to go live to give people time to get here, and I will be starting promptly at 11 o'clock Central Standard Time. All right. So I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Um, Finished eating breakfast. I was reading this article, which I thought was very interesting. It's not even an article, it was a paper written by John Jacques Rousseau. It's called A Discourse on Inequality. And it really explains so much about why society is so screwed up. Um, excuse me. I'm going to start by reading this quote from Aristotle. It says, "We should consider what we should consider what is natural, not in things depraved, but in those which are rightly ordered according to nature." So most of what's going on today is not natural, and people are so far removed from what is natural. They're so far removed from natural law, from the natural order of things. So when I did that video about anarchy, people were saying, "Oh, anarchy would never work." Anarchy was the state of nature. Anarchy was the way things were before we ceded our sovereignty to these assholes who want to control our lives. So the reason why this article or this discourse is so important because it really traces how all of this shit first started. Um, so Rousseau, again, it's supposed to be John Jacques Rousseau, but I keep getting it mixed up. I keep because the way it's spelled it doesn't look like Rousseau. Anyway, Rousseau wrote that he wished he was born in a country in which the people were sovereign. He wanted to live and die free, and he rejected the notion of being docile to the state. He wrote that no one should be above the law and that no one should be afraid of the government. Excuse me. So first, I'm going to define a few terms that Rousseau uses. Um, so first, the noble savage. The noble savage is a man who was born free. He is his own sovereign, and the reason that he's noble is because he understands the difference between right and wrong based on his own experience, based on his own personal development and growth. He doesn't need the government to tell him, or not just the government, he doesn't need some external authority to tell him what's right and wrong. Another term I should define is the state of nature. The state of nature is basically the way things were before the government took control over everything, before society, right? And then we also have the state of society. State of society is basically the current state of things with order, so-called order, laws, and social norms that we're all supposed to follow. So the juxtaposition is between the state of nature and the state of society. The state of society is where we are now. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so Rousseau wrote that once people become accustomed to masters, they're not in a condition to do without them. Once people become accustomed to masters, they become estranged from freedom, and they always hand themselves over to more seducers who only make their chains heavier than before. According to Rousseau, there are two inequalities among human beings. The first is natural or physical, and the second are privileges. Natural or physical inequalities are age, health, bodily strength, and qualities of the mind or the soul. And the second equality, which are privileges, is honor, power, or the ability to exact submission from others. Rousseau wrote that the state of nature is a time in which men live freely before the inception of government control. Under the state of nature, there was a natural right of every man to keep what belongs to him. In the state of nature, men would compare their strength and adroitness to that of animals, and they would no longer be afraid of them. He wrote that wild beasts rarely attacked each other, and that they rarely attacked human beings. So that's why y'all see that picture, right? Because y'all see the man being attacked by the lion because he's in a state of society, and then you see the so-called savage attacking the lion because we look down on so-called primitive people, right? We think that we're better than them when really they're actually better than us in many respects. So, excuse me. In a state of nature, animals rarely make war with men, except in the case of self-defense or excessive hunger. And again, he's comparing human beings to animals because he says that animals are the same, or humans are the same as animals, except we have the ability for self-development and basically to go against our instinct. We have the ability. He didn't even say that it was based on reason. He said it was based on going against instinct. But I'm going to get to that. He wrote that Negroes and savages were not afraid of wild beasts, even though they lived in the wild. They exposed themselves to the point of being almost naked, and they were only armed with bows and arrows, yet they were rarely devoured by wild beasts. So it's really interesting that he made a distinction between Negroes and savages, because I guess at that point, savages were considered Native Americans. When you look at all of the old case law about Native Americans, they constantly refer to them as savages. I don't know why. Um, but I would say the Africans, the tribal Africans, are pretty much the same as Native Americans. They were sovereign, living according to their own will. The reason that he made this reference to animals was to demonstrate that in a state of nature, there would not be chaos and disorder. Men would not go around attacking other men. Animals would not attack human beings either. There would be a state of order based on nature, which is preserved based on self-preservation and survival. He wrote that men to be healthier living under a state of nature. Health problems are often caused by excessive labor, overeating, which leads to indigestion, the consumption of liquor, excesses of every kind, and poor diets. He wrote that the noble savages rarely have health problems except for wounds and old age. He wrote about how in the state of nature, all animals are more robust and have more strength, courage, and vigor as opposed to animals that are raised in captivity. But once they become domesticated, they lose these advantages and become depraved, which is the same thing about human beings. When we're brought up under a state of society, we become depraved and we lose our natural instincts and ability to, make decisions and to have empathy. We're going to get to all that. So, given that the savage is in a perpetual state of danger, he sleeps lightly. In a state of nature, the primary concern of the savage or the noble savage is self-preservation. As men become more sociable, he becomes weak, timid, and servile. His effeminate way of life weakens his strength and courage. In a state of nature, men would exercise the faculties which are concerned with attack or defense, either for overcoming prey or preventing him from becoming the prey of other animals. Right? We don't have more. We just sit back and allow the government to trample over us. We're just so docile and so submissive because we're not existing within the state of nature. In a state of nature, animals are ingenious machines and human beings are built the same way. Right. That's the price of penancy. And I'm going to get to that. He does address how the state of society leads to dependency, which ultimately leads to our enslavement. Every man and animal was created with an inherent deference in calling for a return to the state of nature. The state of nature comes with a need for self-improvement. I think there was another term that he used for, the perfect ability, perfection or something. Anyway, it was a lot. I mean, it was 44 pages, but I didn't have a lot of time. I just kind of read it. I took notes and, I need to go back and read it again because I'm sure there were points that I missed. But in a state of nature, the savage would be left his own instinct and animalistic tendencies. To will and not to will, to desire and fear are essential for the development of his faculties. Rousseau wrote that it is not a misfortune for men to be primitive. It is not a misfortune for them to go naked, to have no dwellings, and to like the superficialities which we think are so necessary. They have no need for covering because they live in warm climates. If the weather becomes so cold if the weather becomes cold, they can develop the skills they need to appropriate the skins of beasts. So the savage has no desires other than his physical wants. The only goods he recognizes are food, sex, and sleep. The only evil he fears are pain and hunger. Therefore, a man who exists within a state of nature cannot be corrupted. He cannot lie and he cannot be manipulated. He is not driven by the need for money, power, or prestige. So it's the same thing with animals, right? Animals don't lie. Like if they don't like you, they're not going to fake it. They don't put on fake smiles. They don't pretend. I mean, they may be, strategic in their hunting or survival skills, but with an animal, it is what it is. A cat or a dog is not going to pretend. But humans are removed from the state of nature, and so they're going around being pretentious so that they can survive within this fake system. It says man used the evolution of languages. Rousseau used the evolution of languages as evidence that primitive men lived by consent rather than by force. Primitive men just agreed on what to call things. There was no need for force or manipulation. Primitive men weren't as dumb as people think. So, I mean, if you think about the evolution of languages, it wasn't based on government. It's just we agreed to call things based on consent. You're going to call this a cup. You're going to call that a river. You're going to call that a lake. You're going to call this animal a lion, right? So you don't need the government. That was the point he was trying to make. In a state of nature, there is no good or bad. There is only self-preservation. Judgment only comes with civilization. In civilization, good and bad are determined based on the prejudices of others and in comparison to others. So, in a state of nature, we have all these prejudices, right? We have misogyny, we have homophobia, the list goes on, xenophobia, and then people are trying to say, oh, that's like that's the man. So like they're going to say homosexuality is being promoted by the system, by society. It's like, no, homophobia was the creation of these Abrahamic religions. So in a state of nature, there would be no homophobia. There would be no misogyny. All that shit comes from society. So you're trying to act like you're woke because you're ignorant, and you're not woke. You're brainwashed, and you're part of the fucking system. So Rousseau rejected the notion made by Hobbes that in a state of nature, man was naturally wicked. Rousseau says that Hobbes is judging men based on their current condition rather than an actual state of nature. Rousseau says that it's a man's dependence on his masters which makes him weak. Without having masters to rely upon, men would be self-reliant and independent. Man's reliance on masters prevents him from developing the necessary faculties to understand the difference between good and evil for themselves. Their servitude prevents them from exercising their own reasoning and judgment, which ultimately prevents them from becoming men and relegates them to being robust children. Gosh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I hope my sig. Yeah, that's why I didn't want to do a live stream, because sometimes the signal is bad, and I'm sorry. It is what I hope you guys can hear it, because man, this stuff is really important. I'm sorry about the sound issues, but I'm going to try to get through this. Because men in civilized society never develop natural virtue, that is the ability to discover between right and wrong on their own, they become less empathetic. In a civilized society, men feel no compassion for the suffering of others because they are too far removed from the state of nature. Instead of feeling compassion, they become jealous of their rulers. They want to be in a tyrant's place so that they can be the ones inflicting suffering on others, right? Y'all see this all the time. They don't have compassion. They want to be the asshole. They want to be the corrupt judge. They want to be the president. They want to be the governor, right? Not because they have empathy or because they're going to do things differently. They want to be the one oppressing you. And that's the way they see it. And I'm going to get back to that, because this article goes more in detail about that. The more civilized men become, the more they are able to rationalize evil. In a civilized society, men have no concept of true justice. They give deference to authority. They breed contempt for their fellow man, and they create an unhealthy love for themselves, which is basically narcissism. It is impossible to make a man a slave unless he's put in a situation where he cannot do without the help of others. It is the mutual dependence on men which relegates him to the bondage of servitude. This bondage does not exist within a state of nature. Civil society was created by the first man who laid claim to a piece of land and convinced others that said land belonged to him. According to Rousseau, the impostors who claim to own real property are the ones who created war, crime, murder, and all types of misfortune. He calls them impostors because land cannot belong to people but is held in common to all. Their evil intentions and lack of empathy is backed and supported by the system. Exactly. Right. That I mean, it's like you go to court, that judge doesn't give a fuck about you. He or she is going to rationalize their evil and not give a fuck about how it actually affects flesh and blood human beings. No empathy whatsoever. It's just, oh, well, technically, they're allowed to, take your property. They're allowed to, evict you and blah, blah, blah. Like, now you're homeless. Now anyway, yeah, the system does back evil, but that's the whole point of it. In a state of nature, men are separated from women as soon as they procreate. Children also depart from their mothers once they are able to fend for themselves. Mankind behaved in the same manner as animals. At some point, man began to feel that they were superior to other species and began to diverge from the behavior of other animals. It was at this point that man became less driven by self-preservation and more concerned with mutual interest. Then he became reliant on the assistance of others. In a state of nature, men had solitude, which allowed them the leisure to think and discover things for themselves. Men were independent and did not behave like their fathers. Once men lived settled lives, they became more uniform. Their lives were uniform in terms of the lives they led and the food they ate. Okay, my connection went out. Okay, so man began to compare himself to others, which led to shame and envy. Man began to feel contempt for his fellow human being. The result is that man became more revengeful, terrible, bloody, and cruel. To correct this depravity, which was created by the state itself, man began to create moral and legal institutions to punish offenders. Man became less reliant on their own faculties and judgment. They became petulant children whose character was determined by the social order. Because the state of society prevented men from being able to provide for themselves, men became enslaved by this social order. Now men had something to look forward to and things to lose. As a result of the state of society, men had to appear to be what they really were not. In order to compete within the state of society, men engaged in trickery and all sorts of vices. Men became perpetually employed in the pursuit of getting others to serve their interests. This led to more rivalry and competition. This led to the enslavement of men. This led to men becoming obsessed with appropriating the possessions of others. All of these inequalities began with the creation of property rights. With the expansion of law in society, the rich became powerful, natural liberty was destroyed, men were subjected to perpetual labor, slavery, and wretchedness. Societies began to spread all over the earth until we were all enslaved. Ultimately, the state of society led to the creation of communities which massacred their fellow human beings due to their competition for resources. Okay, I just want to comment on that because he was talking about natural liberty, and what we have now is not natural liberty. These are privileges. People think that our rights come from the Constitution. No, the Constitution was an enumeration of rights that already existed under natural law. It did not create rights. And so when you think that your rights come from the government, that's not a right. That's a privilege that can be taken away. Just like we saw under COVID, which I keep using that as an example because that's a recent thing. They took away our right to earn a livelihood. They put us under curfews. If that was a right, then government wouldn't have been able to take it away. The purpose of rights is to limit the government's control. It's not to, I don't know what people think it is. If it's a right, Yeah, I think I explained that in the last video that rights were created at the time that the kings were sovereign, and so everything that the king did was considered an act of God. So when something is a right, that means that there are things that are so sacred and fundamental that even a sovereign can't violate them. So it's not a right against a human being; it's a right for protection from the government. All right, so let's continue. Out of this social disorder grew a greater need for government, right? Because you have all of these massacres, all of this violence, which was created from society itself. Mankind unconditionally ceded their sovereignty for protection from an absolute master. The result was the voluntary establishment of tyranny. Man began to see the government as the progenitors of liberty when they're actually the ones who took it away from us. Given the state of society, we no longer come into this world as men. We come into this world as degenerate slaves. We are told that the Constitution and its laws are a social contract. However, the duties are not reciprocal. When a contract is violated or breached, parties have a right to terminate said contract. However, the social contract which we are forced to obey is not based on consent but compulsion. The power that was given to the state by its people is being perpetually abused. Given that mankind is so far removed from the state of nature, most people have no ability to recognize this abuse. These rigged elections give the appearance of legitimacy to an illegitimate government and its arbitrary abuse of power. The reason that people submit to this illegitimate authority is because they're looking below instead of looking above. They love authority because it allows them to oppress others, but they rarely consider the fact that they are oppressed themselves. They will continue to submit so long as they have the ambition to enslave others. As I stated in the beginning, there are only two inequalities among human beings: physical and privilege. In the state of nature, the only inequality which is legitimate is the law of the strongest. The inequality of privilege is illegitimate and can only be maintained by force. So the purpose of this course was to trace the origins of inequality and oppression. The origin of social inequality is society itself. The developed world continues to look down on primitive cultures, even though they're free and we're the ones who are enslaved. So that's pretty much the end of it. There was more to it, but obviously I couldn't get into the whole thing. But I don't want to address the points that really stood out because people keep talking about how anarchy would never work, that people would return to violence, there would be chaos. But the chaos came from the social order, it came from civilization. That was not, people lived for what a million years, you know, before civilization, and there were no problems. People have conflicts, but it wasn't like this. It wasn't a perpetual state of war. It wasn't oppression. It wasn't you're being a wage slave. So yeah, I'm sorry if you don't support anarchy. You support violence and tyranny. It is what it is. I don't know how you can try to rationalize this shit, but that's also what the article says, that in their state of society, men use their reasoning to justify tyranny and oppression. So that's pretty much it, unless someone has any questions. All right. I'm going to go back and listen to the playback. Society is now in a sunk cost fallacy. It is because now you're so invested in maintaining the current system because you're so invested in it, and that's the problem. Once you become accustomed to living under a master, you can't really go back to liberty. Some people can. I could, because I'm willing to give up all of the luxury, but it's not easy. You know, you don't want to become independent, now you have to go find your own water. Now you have to go find your own food, build your own housing. But those are skills that you would learn under a state of nature anyway. So I would much rather live under a state of nature where I was free to do whatever I wanted without being controlled by the government. And yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't bother people because people think it's legitimate. They think that they actually consented to it based on these rigged elections. And again, they don't mind being oppressed because they get to oppress others. So long as they're not at the very bottom, they're okay with it. Human beings have invested so far into it that going back would be destruction and chaos, but that still doesn't make it right. I think he addressed that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't take notes on that part, but he did address that. I don't remember exactly what he said. So I don't know. I can't really answer that. Maybe I'll put it in the comment section. And actually, I'm going to post a link to this discourse in equality. But I'm going to answer your question in the comment section. I need to go back and read it because I know he addressed it. All right. Well, thank you for stopping by. I'm going to wrap this up. Yeah, this all leads to this all. This is all about anti-natalism or at least negative utilitarianism about reducing human suffering because this system ain't it. This is not leading to happiness. Everybody's miserable. You're wage slaves. You're not free. So if you think the government is the progenitor of liberty, you're wrong. All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close out. I will post the answer to your question in the comment section.